Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I truly hope you're safe and above all healthy. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Last week on this program, we listened to Tino Cuellar, president of Carnegie, and Jack Goldsmith, a learned hand professor of law at Harvard, talk about the aggrandizement of presidential power. Tino talked about a president who was flooding the zone with authoritarian gestures and musing about a third term. Jack Goldsmith, a Republican, talked about an administration's systematic disrespect of judicial process and its extortionist abuse of governmental power. We're also witnessing a flood of a different kind, an unprecedented, unparalleled flooding of the zone in a series of unethical, corrupt practices by an administration that seems to no longer distinguish between the American national interest and what's in the political or personal business interest of the president. Today, we're going to talk about this issue, covering three key issues. Number one, the magnitude of the problem. Number two, the constraints that could be arrayed to constrain, stop it, or stop it. And finally, the impact of self-dealing in the Trump administration on American foreign policy and national security. To do all this, there is no better human on the planet than Norm Eisen. Norm, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this program. I don't even know where to begin, frankly, with respect to your bio, your background. You're the founder and the executive chair of Democracy Defenders Action. You're the co-founder and publisher of The Contrarian. I would suggest everybody subscribe to this. It's really an extraordinary set of ruminations on what challenges the Republic. You also served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee during the impeachment proceedings of President Trump, 2019 to 2020. You were also America's first ambassador to the Czech Republic from 2011 to 2014. And from January 2009 to 2011, you served as a White House special counsel and special assistant to the president for ethics and government reform. I only point out that, Norm, you earned the reputation, apparently, of nickname for Dr. No, for your stringent ethics and anti-corruption efforts. In fact, Obama writes in his memoirs, I believe, recalls an instance in which you asked which out-of-town conference administration officials would be admitted to attend, and you replied, "If it sounds like fun, you can't go." I would also point out, before we get to the discussion, just by way of comparison, that in 2006, the president of Bulgaria gifted to then President George W. Bush a 2-month-old puppy. That puppy was sent to the National Archives until a suitable family could be found. Just to give you some sense of the fundamental contradiction between what we're witnessing now and, by and large, the practices of most administrations. So normally turn to you in terms of the magnitude of the problem. You litigated cases during Trump 1.0 on the issue of ethics and self-dealing. How would you characterize the difference between Trump 1.0 and 2.0 on this issue?
Well, Aaron, it's akin to the difference between that Bulgarian puppy and the business that the puppy did on the lawn of the National Archives when they took the puppy out to walk it. The deterioration is so profound that we've never seen anything like this, even in Trump's first term. I mean, the open acceptance of a plane worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with at least some media reports that the plane from Qatar, a country that has such complicated relations with the United States and the region, and coupled with some media reports that plane would move to Donald Trump's use in connection with his presidential library after he leaves, and that he asked for it. And he got to inspect it in advance at the Palm Beach airport. I mean, if that is not, if that does not have all the indicia of a present to the president that is constitutionally forbidden. The Constitution says presidents are emoluments. Emoluments just a
Right.
fancy 18th century word for swag. If that's not a constitutionally forbidden gift, it has all the indicators of a gift to the president. It doesn't stop there. A $2 billion UAE fund investing in his stablecoin company. Attendees bidding to have dinner with him by purchasing his meme coin, including those holding offices in the Chinese communist apparatus. I mean, it's staggering. Nothing like it. Just to give you a point of contrast, when Obama was president, this emoluments clause, this constitutional prohibition on Bulgarian puppies or what have you, they should have named that dog emoluments. When Obama was president, and the Norwegian Nobel Committee called up to say they wanted to give him the Nobel Prize. And there's a cash award. And the first stop when the secretary of the Norwegian Nobel Committee came to the White House, like, oh no, you got to talk to Norm. Never mind the president. And I said, no, President Obama cannot take that award. Absolutely not. The cash is not permitted. So I wouldn't even let him refinance his house, his modest family home in Chicago, because he was regulating the banks in the middle of the Great Recession. And I think this corruption is connected to other forms of corrupting and abusing the power of the state that I know we'll come to. For example, the illegal, in my view, I've just issued a report, the illegal deployment of the National Guard into Los Angeles. One form of illegality breeds another. It's kind of a broken windows theory.
Right. I was going to lead with that. You got there before I did. So can you unpack this for us in terms of Title 10, Posse Comitatus, and the Insurrection Act? What the president has done so far, presumably, is in line with what he is allowed to do, or is he already in violation with respect to the deployment of U.S. Marines for law enforcement purposes on the streets of America's second largest city? Where are we in terms of Los Angeles from a legal point of view? And what is the expectation, do you think?
Part of the reason when I was in the White House that I was so strict on the ethics rules and all of the legal rules, I got that name, Dr. No, is because of this broken windows theory that if the president will violate, if you allow the smaller violations of the law, and there's nothing small about that Qatari plane, it will lead to larger violations. I believe you have those here. I've just issued a report at my organization, Democracy Defenders Fund, about the illegalities. The president has proclaimed that he's nationalizing the Guard pursuant to an authority, Section 12406, that allows him to do that, a congressional statute that allows him to do that, only if there's a rebellion or another very serious, where's the rebellion? The predicate. Yesterday, we just got our fourth decision in another statute that also requires the Alien Enemies Act that the president is trying to use to round up and abduct migrants in our countries. 4 courts have said The Alien Enemies Act is for invasion. There's no invasion. Well, there's no rebellion in Los Angeles. There's largely peaceful protests, mostly over an area of a few blocks. There's sporadic acts of stupid irresponsibility, like setting a Waymo car aflame. That's a handful of people. That is not a rebellion under the law. And there's litigation now. The governor of California has brought a case. Number two, that authority that the president is relying on says the order has to be issued through the governor's office. Well, the governor objects to this. So there's a second violation. Third, when the president issued this decision on Saturday night, he didn't limit it to Los Angeles, Aaron. He has issued general terms for the use of Section 12406. He can deploy them now, the National Guard, anywhere in the country, according to his own words, as he's baselessly done in Los Angeles. Number four, to make it even worse, he's sending the Marines in. There's another law that prohibits that. It's called the Posse Comitatus Act. You can't use Marines to, or any military, to do domestic law enforcement. These are largely peaceful civilian protesters. We have ample LAPD and other law enforcement for that. You don't use the military against peaceful protesters. So it's needless. Now, we'll see what the Marines do if they engage in law enforcement activity. That'll be a violation. And the terms of what the president wrote on Saturday night seem to allow that. We've just seen a letter, an internal letter from Kristi Noem, DHS Secretary, to Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, that seems to get into this using troops for domestic law enforcement. It's a first-class mess. And, you know, the president is speeding down the slippery slope from financial corruption to abuse of power in what's going on in Los Angeles.
Right. So we have constraints. We are a nation steeped in the rule of law. There are norms in their institutions. So let me ask you, let's move to the issue, both when it comes to self-dealing and corruption and what's happening in Los Angeles. The constraints on presidential power and the aggrandizement of power. There are the markets, there's public opinion, there are the states, there's the Constitution. And I've used this line before. Harry Truman quipped about Nixon that he may have read the Constitution, but he didn't understand it. Seems to me there are a number of people in the Trump administration who actually have read the Constitution. And
Are you sure? Are you sure?
No, I'm not sure, actually. But they seem to have figured out that the document, extraordinary as it is filled with interpretive ambiguities and ways in which I'm imagining a scene. Nicole Hemmer from Vanderbilt on this show talked about Jurassic Park and the velociraptors. I don't know if you saw the movie. I wouldn't recommend 2 and 3, but Jurassic Park 1 is worth seeing. The velociraptors test the fences. They are actually working things out to see where the vulnerabilities lie. And I think where are the constraints really, Norman? I know you put great faith in the courts, as do I, and you've single-handedly, my son works for Democracy Forward. He's involved in this as well. But,
he is.
But where are the constraints? Have the courts taken a single action that, in fact, would impose a cost or consequence on any Trump administration official, either criminal contempt or fines?
Yes.
Where are the consequences?
Your wonderful son Daniel, who I'm often on Zoom with, and the rest of the members of this tremendous coalition have brought almost 300 cases, nearly 200 of those have resulted in court orders. Over 190 have resulted in court orders that have stopped the administration in some form or fashion. We have almost 100 legal matters at Democracy Defenders Fund. Just to take a few examples, we went to court to stop Donald Trump from doxing and attacking 6,000 FBI agents who worked on the January 6 cases. They're still there. We went to court and we just the other day, just yesterday, we had a mini trial against Doge. They're behaving illegally. Yes, the court said they're behaving illegally, laid down guidelines to protect data, certain data from Doge. We just got that preliminary injunction. We went to court. We stopped the president from breaking the election system. He wanted to tilt the election system to benefit his voters at the expense of others. We stopped that. And we represent a coalition of almost 36 conservatives in all of these Alien Enemies Act cases, filing briefs everywhere from the trial court to the United States Supreme Court. Guess what? You want to know, have the courts made a difference? They forced Donald Trump to bring Abrego Garcia back. And that's not the only migrant who's been brought back. That was hard to do. Now, the administration has put together a dubious and questionable indictment. I'll have more to say about that in the future to cover for themselves, I believe. It's motivated as a fig leaf. We saw a senior official in that U.S. Attorney's Office in Tennessee quit recently. Questions about whether he quit because this was politicized. Be that as it may, Abrego Garcia is back, that Salvadorian individual who was abducted by the administration back to El Salvador, contrary to a court order. Another migrant has also been brought back who was wrongly removed. Yes, for the moment, the courts are they're pushing back. Donald Trump's very angry about it. He's lashing out. But I do believe that there is, for the moment, there's accountability. Now, we'll see if that holds up.
You know, Peter Breker, writing in the Times, in a long piece last week on self-dealing and corruption, talked about, and I quote, what he considers the, quote, death and dearth of public outrage. And I wonder, does public opinion matter in this? Do people care? Do they think all politicians do this? Did they care once and no longer care about this? How do you prevent the kind of self-dealing that we've seen either on the Qatar 747-8 or the cryptocurrency scam? I mean, the president seems to have turned the White House into a ATM machine. And is there any way to constrain and stop that? He's hollowed out many of the watchdogs, inspector generals. What about that?
Yes.
How do you constrain that?
Number one, there are public constraints. For example, in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race that was concluded in April, the very clever folks in Wisconsin made that race into a referendum on the people versus Musk and Trump. And they used Elon Musk because we've just issued a big report at Democracy Defenders Fund about how Elon Musk benefited while he was same time gutting the government before he left. They used that as a referendum really on the question of, do we want a favored oligarch in America? And the resounding loss, a 10-point, much wider swing. Now, you might ask, what does Elon Musk have to do with the Wisconsin Supreme Court? The answer is he tried to spend heavily to swing that race and was repudiated. I believe it was a larger judgment on this way of doing business. And you are going to see a tsunami at the polls, New Jersey, Virginia this year, midterms next year, the voters are really going to express. Aaron, I read in the New York Times this morning that Republican members of Congress in Texas are afraid for their seats. There's talk of doing a redistricting and putting some Democratic voters into those ruby red districts. Like, no, too dangerous this year. So there's political consequences. Number two, the law applies here too. In my prior litigation experience in Trump's first term, I litigated this prohibition on presents and emoluments. And we were very successful in that litigation. We won in the Fourth Circuit. We won in the Second Circuit. It took a while. Trump ended up leaving office, and the Supreme Court said, he's gone. The case is moot. He's no longer president. But we can build on those precedents. And that kind of a case could be brought again. And I'm sure someone is going to do that. So there's political accountability and there's legal accountability for this. Just like there's accountability for what's happening in Los Angeles. Governor Newsom brought a lawsuit saying, hey, these 12406 deployments are illegal.
I wonder, Norm, we talked about the states, the courts, public opinion, the Constitution, the Emoluments Clause. It seems to me that at the heart of the problem and the biggest challenge of all is the fact that the founders relied very heavily on something they referred to as moral self-governance. That is to say, the capacity, the ability of a leader to control that leader's ambitions, personal ambitions, and desires. And that, of course, is the one constraint, it seems to me, that have kept American presidents from, kept them coloring with between the lines when it comes to the aggrandizement of presidential power for their own personal interest. That sense of moral self-governance never existed in Trump 1, and it certainly doesn't exist now, which means that, and again, it's hard for me to believe, Norm, sometimes we're 6 months in? In 6 months, look what we've seen.
It's less than 6 months. I know it feels like it has to be at least 6 months.
Right. And I know you as I do, put a lot of faith in the capacity of this republic to endure. But norms are being broken, institutions undermined, government service trashed. As you look beyond, and I want to move in a minute to the issue of foreign policy and national security when it comes to self-dealing and the aggrandizement of presidential power. But, well, actually, I'll save my comment on the future for the end. Let's move to, you were the first American ambassador to the Czech Republic. You have a great deal of expertise and interest in transatlantic relations and in foreign policy. Could you sketch out for us broadly and briefly the implications of this sort of self-dealing on American interests abroad and, we don't talk much about this these days, American values?
Yes, and if you'll indulge me in a short comment on the founders and the framers, and again, it's related. They certainly believed in moral self-discipline and that they wanted leaders of virtue, but they recognized that that you might have, I think it's Federalist 70, that you could have a faction like MAGA that would install a tyrant. And they wrote, we talked about it a lot in the impeachment, they wrote in the Federalist presciently about a demagogue who might arise and seek to reap the whirlwind and behave in many of these autocratic, authoritarian ways that Donald Trump is behaving, and to manipulate the majority, using the power of what they called faction. MAGA is exactly what they were worried about. That is why they put in, and it brings me to how we're viewed abroad and American values. That is why they put in checks and balances, Aaron. And you have Article 1, Congress, and Article 3, the federal courts, that are constraining Article 2, the presidency. That's what's led to that 190 orders stopping Trump. You also have the backup of the courts if Article 1, the majority takes control. The MAGA majority has not been stopping Trump, but we're seeing that some nominees, some issues, we're starting to see some pushback. Now, how does and then you have really the fourth branch, not the press, the states and localities. That's another, our federalism, right? The states, for example, it's state AGs who are bringing these cases. Governor Newsom went to court to stop Donald Trump in the illegal deployment in LA. So how does all of that play out internationally with the companion issue of the of these massive sums that are sluicing through to Donald Trump's pocketbook through the businesses that he continues to maintain an interest in? The world is brokenhearted. I'm not, and you know this because you talk to people all over the world all the time. People, I go to Europe once a month. I don't think I was the first ambassador to the Czech Republic. I think that was one of my predecessors. But as a former ambassador to the Czech Republic, I come to Prague and to Europe all the time. And the Europeans are brokenhearted. It's not personal about Donald Trump. It's the betrayal of those values, including the structural attacks. They admire our Constitution. The Czechs had Americans who helped them write their Constitution. George Washington is still seen as a model of the virtue that you talk about because he voluntarily gave up power. So the world is brokenhearted because the American example and the anchor of transatlanticism that has been so strong in the post-World War II era, not just on both sides of the pond, not just ultimately defeating fascism, hanging on, enduring, defeating communism. That American model is broken by Donald Trump, who's embracing illiberalism, embracing autocrats, attacking our virtues. But there's much more to the relationship than just whoever happens to be, I tell people, whoever happens to be in the White House at any given time. So part of the reason I make these regular trips to Europe is to lift up all of the other dimensions of that relationship, like the massive multi-trillion-dollar trade relation, the largest in the world, is between the transatlantic, between and among the transatlantic alliance.
I mean, could the enterprise that the Trump family and business interests have fashioned with respect to cryptocurrency, can that, with stable coins, can that have a damaging impact in terms of financial stability and illicit transactions? How do you regulate something like that? I mean, the Trump family gains from stablecoin or the crypto enterprise, I think Washington Post reports, is well over $250 million since the beginning of the year. Does that impact or skew economic relations and enhance the prospects of additional illicit dealing abroad?
It's like hanging a for sale sign out. And with stable coins, you can't have it's not very stable. You can't have the man who is in charge of regulating stablecoin, where you want to have reasonable, strong, effective regulation, also have huge financial interest in stablecoin, where the industry and he have interests that run the other way. So it's a textbook definition of a conflict of interest. The interests are clashing. Of course, the rest of the world is going to say, well, if the U.S. Stablecoin market is going to be questionable because we have questions about whether Donald Trump is acting with a conflict or not, we'll do business elsewhere where we can have regulatory trust, where we won't have some big bust or run on the stablecoin bank with those low standards in the United States. So I think it harms us in attracting business in the US. Instead, we attract people who want to buy influence, like the people who attended Trump meme coin dinner at his club. And that's not the kind of business we want in the United States. We want people who want to be ethical, not who want to curry favor.
It's hard to stop those practices, though, isn't it, Norm? I mean, when you have the spokesperson for the White House basically saying about, the dinner of the century, that this was done in the president's private capacity. I mean, the sheer brazenness and arrogance of the defense of self-dealing, gets to Peter Baker's issue about the absence of outrage. I mean, you need, in another administration, in a galaxy far, far away, not tied to the realities back here on planet Earth, you would have had hearings, presumably, in Congress. But the Republicans in Congress won't and cannot react either to the cryptocurrency issue. I mean, I guess there is this Genius Act working its way through Congress.
Well,
there just doesn't appear to be constraints. One additional point before we move to the future, and that is, again, back to the Qatari 747/8. The White House counsel basically has said that this will be a two-phase sort of transfer. First, sovereign to sovereign, the government of Qatar to the Defense Department. And then from that, another transfer agreement from DOD to whatever is going to pass for the Trump library. It seems to me, and you're right to point out, the president has already toured this aircraft, his so-called palace in the sky. What's to stop that transfer from taking place?
Somebody's going to have to go and get a court order that this is unconstitutional and stop it that way. And it's certainly not going to be any shame that Trump feels he's doubled down. It's not going to be the MAGA majority in Congress. We at Democracy Defenders Fund actually had a New York Times op-ed about it. It want that crypto legislation, including the Genius Act, which you referred to, which would regulate stablecoin. We want that to be a bill that is good and strong, including stopping Trump's conflicts. There's no appetite in the MAGA majority to take him on that way. So those are problematic. But the Constitution is the Constitution, and people can go to court, as we did, and can get a court order. And I think it is unconstitutional. So we'll see. We'll see if anybody litigates the issue.
Yeah. I want to talk now, as we approach the end of our 45 minutes, about the future. 5 months and change. Most everything that I've experienced in the 40 plus years I've been in Washington, most of the things I cared about, government service, some degree of selflessness about that service, institutions, norms, values, moral self-governance, public virtue. All of that seems to be up in the air right now, at sea. And I just wonder, in the few minutes that remain, if you can sort of cast your analysis and your intuition forward to paint a more hopeful picture of what might come. Doug Brinkley said on the show that he believed America was, to use his words, built to last. I believe that too. But we've had crises before, but we've never quite been here before as a republic. So
it's as if you'd had Jefferson Davis or Andrew Johnson in the White House at the commencement of the Civil War instead of Lincoln. This is an erosion, a betrayal of the American idea from within. We've seen some bad things over our near 250 years. We've never seen that before. Nevertheless, I do think that that other outcomes are possible. We've seen countries where they've thrust aside autocrats and what that looks like. Brazil, the Czech Republic, where I was ambassador, Romania. And we've seen countries where they fail. Turkey, Hungary, there's an ample list of them. We're at a crossroads. We could go the way of Brazil and do the right thing and recommit to democracy, thrust out the autocracy, or the autocracy could take root and endure as it's done in Turkey and Hungary. Part of the reason, the advantage that we have over all those countries is we're an older democracy. The democratic freedoms are enshrined in the Constitution. Poll after poll shows the American people like their freedoms. They don't want to give up their freedoms. And there is this structure of the three branches of government, with the first branch, the legislative, and this third branch, the judicial, constraining the executive, and also that fourth branch I talked about, the states and the localities. Ultimately, I believe that the American people are going to express their civic virtue in an anti-autocracy vote, like that People versus Musk, like that referendum in Wisconsin. Clearly, people are going to be voting on the chaos, confusion, and corruption of the first 4 months plus of the Trump administration. And from what I can tell, people don't like it. Even people who voted for Donald Trump say, well, this isn't what I voted for, more chaos. He represented something different. But in the meantime, we're going to keep litigating. We're going to keep filing our cases because these laws don't execute themselves on their own. Somebody has to bring the cases. And we and our wonderful colleagues, Democracy Forward, ACLU, Public Citizen, we are very, very active litigants in the court of law. And then speaking out, as I'm doing today, being here with you in the court of public opinion. That's very important also to win, in fact, to win back those voters. Litigation, elections, political leadership. These are the kinds of public mobilization. Do you know, I'll just add a point there that gives me optimism, Aaron. Professor Erica Chenoweth of Harvard says that there have been more and more intense public demonstrations now than back in 2017 when Trump first came in. So that's another material factor. So as I look, I think of them as the 4 Ps of preserving democracy: court proceedings, activity in and at the polls, including election polls, public protest, and political leadership. On that last point, I think some in Congress were a little stunned by the Trump shock and awe. We weren't in the litigation field. We met shock and awe with Flood the Zone. I was so pleased I went to court on that elections matter the other day, Trump's illegal elections EO, and got the PI. Next to me, there was a whole table full of lawyers for the Democratic minority in the House and Senate. Wow. They're getting the picture. A lot of litigation has been brought by AGs. Wow. They've been very active. They've given the private litigants like me a run for our money. So, there's signs that all 4 of those pistons, court proceedings, election polls, public protest, political leadership, all 4 of those Ps are starting to work in unison like pistons in an engine.
Right. And I think the issue of civic responsibility is critically important. The country is not a big ATM machine where you only get to make withdrawals. You got to make deposits too. And the deposits are the responsibilities and obligations of citizenship, not just voting. Somehow connecting yourself to something bigger than yourself with regard to the citizen of the country that in which you live. And I worry a little about the future. I'm old, so I can worry for a living.
You're right to be worried, and nobody knows which way it'll go. But there's reason. Right. There's evidence for both forks in the road. Yeah.
Norma, Eisen, I want to thank you. I know on a personal note, you are a child of Holocaust survivors, and I want to just convey something that you were imparted, that your parents imparted to you. It's a Hebrew expression, and I think it bears repeating now. I think that both of your parents said to you that your job is not to finish the work, but neither are you, the child of free people, free not to do your share. And I can think of no better way to conclude than that. It's extraordinarily wonderful advice for all of us as Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter. I worked and voted for Republicans and Democrats. It doesn't matter. It's wonderful advice as we confront the challenges that lie ahead. So, Norma, I want to thank you for everything that you've done and everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Aaron.
And take good care.
You too. Be safe.
Yes.